welcome to Simpler Bible, a daily journey to biblical understanding. We left off yesterday with Paul about to face the council of the priests and the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Paul is brilliant, and let's look here at what happens, what unfolds. Acts 23, beginning in verse 1. Looking intently at the council, Paul said, "Brothers, I have lived my life before God in all good conscience up to this day." That's his opening statement. I have lived my life in all good conscience before God up to this day. The high priest Ananias commanded those who stood next to him to strike him on the mouth. Then Paul said, "God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. Are you sitting there to judge me according to the law, and yet contrary to the law you order me to be struck?" I like the fiery nature of Paul. Those who stood by said, "Would you curse God's high priest?" Paul said, "I didn't know, brothers, that he was the high priest, for it is written, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people." That's Exodus 22:28. So he just thought it was some random dude. He didn't know it was the current high priest. And he was like, "I'm sorry, you're not supposed to speak evil of the high priest. My bad. I apologize." Now, when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other part were Pharisees, so there are several different religious organizations in the first century Jewish world. The two most famous ones in the Bible are the Pharisees and the Sadducees. When Paul perceived that part of the group were Sadducees and the other part were Pharisees, he cried out, and remember, Paul was a Pharisee. He called out in the council, "Brothers, I am a Pharisee, a son of a Pharisee. It is with respect to the hope and the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial." He said, "The reason I'm in trouble today is because I believe in the resurrection from the dead." When he had said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For the Sadducees do not believe in the resurrection, nor angels, nor spirits, but the Pharisees acknowledge them all. Then a great clamor arose, and some of the scribes of the Pharisees' party stood up and contended sharply. "We don't find anything wrong with this man. What if a spirit or an angel spoke to him?" So this is so smart of Paul. So instead of worrying about defending himself, he goes, "Oh, some of these guys believe in the resurrection, some don't. I'm a Pharisee. Hey guys, I was a Pharisee. I'm a son of a Pharisee. I believe in the resurrection, and that's why I'm on trial today." And the Pharisees, which is technically true, but the Pharisees are like, "Oh, this is one of our guys. We're for him. How dare you Sadducees want to throw this guy under the bus? Because the Sadducees don't believe in the resurrection." So what Paul does brilliantly is he pits his opponents against each other instead of against himself. So when the dissension became violent, the tribune, afraid that Paul was going to be torn to pieces by them, that's a pretty violent assembly meeting, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him away from them by force and bring him back to the barracks. The following night, the Lord stood next to him and said, "Take courage, for as you have testified to these facts about me in Jerusalem, you will also testify in Rome." Do you remember what Paul said? He was like, "I got to go to Rome." He's telling the people in Ephesus, I got to go to Jerusalem first. I want to go back through Macedonia. I want to go through Asia. I want to go to Jerusalem, and then I want to go to Rome. Well, he's about to go to Rome. It just wasn't the way he planned. When it was day, the Jews made a plot and bound themselves by an oath, neither to eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. So they basically said, "I'm not going to take a sip of water. I'm not going to take a bite of food until Paul's dead." There were more than 40 of these men who made this conspiracy. And they went to the chief priests and the elders and said, "We have strictly bound ourselves by an oath to taste no food till we have killed Paul. Now therefore you, along with the council, give notice to the tribune to bring him down to you, as though you're going to determine his case more exactly, and we're ready to kill him before he comes near." So they say to the priests and the elders, they say, "Tell the tribune you need to talk to Paul some more. Have him brought back into the council." And their plan is, on the way of Paul being brought back, they're going to kill him. Now, the son of Paul's sister, first we've heard of Paul's sister. The son of Paul's sister heard of their ambush, and he went and entered the barracks and told Paul. So his nephew comes to him and says, "Hey, uncle, Saul, Paul, whatever I'm calling you, Unky," he says, "these guys are waiting to kill you. They've sworn an oath. They're not going to eat or drink until you're dead." So Paul called one of the centurion's soldiers and said, "Take this young man to the tribune, for he has something to tell him." So he took him and brought him to the tribune and said, "Paul the prisoner called me and asked me to bring you this young man, for he has something to say to you." The tribune took him by the hand and going aside asked him privately, "What is it you have to tell me?" And he said, "The Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as though they're going to inquire something more closely about him. But do not be persuaded by them, for more than 40 of their men are lying in ambush for him, who have bound themselves by an oath neither to eat nor drink till they have killed him. And now they are ready, waiting for your consent." So the tribune dismissed the young man, charging him, "Tell no one that you have informed me of these things." And he called 2 of the centurions and said, "Get ready 200 soldiers with 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen." Okay, you have 40 Jews not presumably soldiers, 40 Jews who have decided they're going to try to kill Paul. And this guy is like, I'm not going to let that happen on my watch. And he doesn't get just a few soldiers. He gets 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen. Like 470 guys to escort Paul safely to Caesarea and to take him as far as Caesarea, that's on the coast, at the third hour of the night. So he's like, I'm going to transfer you to Caesarea in the middle of the night. Also provided mounts for Paul to ride on and bring him safely to Felix the governor. And he wrote this letter to the effect, Claudius Lysias, to his excellency, the governor Felix, greetings to you. This man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them, true story, when I came upon them with the soldiers and rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman citizen. Remember, they were going to beat him, and then they found out he was a Roman citizen. Desiring to know the charge for which they were accusing him, I brought him down to their council. I found out that he was being accused about questions of their law, but charged with nothing that deserves death or imprisonment. And when it was disclosed to me that there would be a plot against the man, I sent him to you at once, ordering his accusers to also state before you what they have against him. So the soldiers, according to their instructions, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris, and on the next day they returned to the barracks, letting the horsemen go on with him. When they had come to Caesarea, they delivered the letter to the governor, then they presented Paul also before him. On reading the letter, he asked what province he was from. When he learned he was from Cilicia, he said, I'll give you a hearing when your accusers arrive. And he commanded him to be guarded in Herod's praetorium. Chapter 24. After 5 days. All right. Well, I'll tell you in a second. After 5 days, the high priest Ananias came down with some of the elders and spoke to one Tertullus. And they laid him before the governor their case against Paul. And when he had been summoned, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, Since through you we enjoy much peace, and since by your foresight, most excellent Felix, reforms are being made for this nation, in every way and everywhere, we accept this with all gratitude. But to detain you no further, I beg in your kindness to hear us briefly on this matter. For we have found this man to be a plague. Golly. Can you imagine, right? Like think about that for a minute. Going around your daily business and you're like, man, this person's a plague on society. That's harsh. This is one who stirs up riots among all the Jews throughout the world, and he is the ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. He even tried to profane the temple, but we seized him. By examining him yourself, you will be able to find out from him about everything which we accuse him. The Jews also joined in the charge, affirming all that these things were so. And when the governor had nodded to him to speak, Paul said, Knowing that for many years you have been a judge over this nation, I cheerfully make my defense to you. You can verify that it was not more than 12 days ago since I went up to worship in Jerusalem. All right, so 12 days earlier, right? He gets to Jerusalem. He is fulfilling the vow for these men, and they're fulfilling their 7-day vow. And then on the end of that 7th day is when he gets arrested. And then the next night he's transported. And then 5 days after he's transported. So there's your 12 days. So from the time that he arrives into Jerusalem and he fulfills the vow for the 4 men who need to shave their heads under the Nazirite vow, from that day to this one, it's been 12 days. Sometimes from one chapter to the next, 1,000 years passed in Genesis. Sometimes from one chapter to the next, 100 years passed. Sometimes from one chapter to the next, it's just rolling over. In this case, we have a timeline, which I love. I geek out on the timelines. 12 days have passed. He says, you can verify that it wasn't more than 12 days since I came up to worship in Jerusalem. They did not find me disputing with anyone or stirring up a crowd, either in the temple or in the synagogue or in the city. Neither can they prove to you what they are now bringing against me. But this I confess to you, that according to the way, which they call a sect, I worship the God of our fathers, believing everything laid down by the law and written in the prophets. How many times are we going to see this? When Jesus said, I came to fulfill the law and the prophets, Matthew chapter 5, this is what he means. Paul isn't saying that Jesus came to fulfill all the rules. Paul is saying, I believe the law and the prophets that testify to Christ. In Matthew 5, Jesus is saying, I didn't come to abolish the law and the prophets, but to fulfill them. Why? Because they testify to him. And he says, I have this hope in God, which these men themselves accept, that there is going to be a resurrection of both the righteous and the unrighteous, or the just and the unjust. So I always take pains to have a clear conscience towards God and men. Now, after several years, I came to bring alms to the nation and to present offerings. While I was doing this, they found me purified in the temple, without crowd, without tumult, but some Jews from Asia. They should be here before you to make an accusation should they have any charge against me. So he kind of gets sidetracked. He was like, but there were some Jews from Asia. And he's like, wait, where are those guys? Those should be the ones that are here to accuse me of anything. If they're the ones that started this whole mess by saying I'm profaning the temple. He goes, or else let these men themselves say what wrongdoing they found when I stood before the council, other than this one thing that I cried out while standing among them. It is with respect to the resurrection of the dead that I'm on trial today. But Felix, having a rather accurate knowledge of the way of the Christian movement, put them off, saying, when Lysias, the tribune, comes down, I will decide your case. And then he gave orders to the centurion that he should be kept in custody, but have some liberty, and that none of his friends should ever be prevented from attending to his needs. After some days, Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish, and he sent for Paul and heard him speak about faith in Christ. So Felix, the governor, has a Jewish wife, so she would know and understand the scriptures that Paul's preaching about. And he spoke about faith in Christ. And as he reasoned about the righteousness, and self-control and the coming judgment, Felix was alarmed and said, go away for the present, and then when I get an opportunity, I will summon you. So he's alarmed by righteousness and self-control and the coming judgment of God. At the same time, so he says, go away, and he's in jail, but he's being ministered to by his friends. And he says, go away, I'll summon you back to myself when I want to talk more about this. Listen to this, verse 26. At the same time, he hoped that money would be given to him by Paul, so he sent for him often and conversed with him. You might remember that when Paul was in Thessalonica, there was a guy named Jason, and they couldn't find Paul, so they arrested Jason, and then Jason and his family ended up paying some money, and the people let him go. Well, Felix is kind of hoping that something similar to that will happen, so he keeps having Paul come in front of him. And he keeps bringing Paul back in front of him because he's hoping that he'll receive a bribe, that he'll get paid something. So at the same time, he hoped that money would be given to him by Paul. So he sent for him often to have conversations with him. When 2 full years had elapsed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, and desiring to do the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul in prison. So think about this for a moment. Paul is of one singular mind. That is, I want to make the gospel known to everybody. And Felix is of the mind that, like, maybe if I keep bringing this guy into my presence, maybe he'll bribe me to release him. And over the course of 2 years, Felix keeps sending for Paul, and Paul keeps coming to converse with Felix. And you know that Paul's not just talking about the weather or, have you caught any fish lately? Like, he is portraying to him the gospel. And so Felix gets to hear the gospel repeatedly for 2 years. And that will bring us to the end of chapter 24. Tomorrow we'll be in chapters 25 and 26, and we'll pick up with what happens here next. All right? So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for journeying with us today at Simpler Bible. Together, you and I have looked at another passage of Scripture and come to know the Bible a little bit better and enjoy God more fully. This video, along with all of our videos, can be found at simplerbible.com, where you can enjoy our Through the Bible in a Year course. You can also enjoy a wealth of resources, blog posts that take you a little bit deeper into the text, a Bible study format that you can use with your small groups or your family, and we're creating new content all the time, all with the commitment to help us be people who know and enjoy God more fully. Thank you so much for being part of it, and we can't wait to see you next time.